Good morning. Uh, shall we start the class? First of all, somebody can confirm. Can somebody confirm me whether I'm audible? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Having that note, today's class it's about the second part of the complaints. Before going to the topic, I hope you all are safe, even though we are passing through worse days in the pandemic. Vaccinations gave us some hope, but it may take more than 1 year to complete the vaccination. So having that, we have to do our normal things, even though the pandemic is, or we have to familiar to, or we have to ready to live with within the pandemic. So having that note, I am moving to the today's topic, the complaint functions. The last class we have studied about what is complaints risk and what is complaints functions and role of the complaints functions and formal status of the complaints functions and complaints culture, responsibilities of various parties. Parties means responsibilities of top management as well as the board of directors and complaints officers and all. Then we have seen some topic a topic about the complaints testing, and I have mentioned to you all that in the exams there are questions about this complaints testing. And finally, we have discussed about the complaints functions versus internal audit functions in a financial institution. Do you all have any questions regarding this? Otherwise, I can move to the today's section. If you all have any questions regarding this, the previous class, which mean the core topics of the compliance functions, then I can just clarify it. Otherwise, if you all don't have any questions, then I can move to the today's section. Today's section, of course, about something related to the compliance, but not directly. It is about this anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. That part, as well as FIU and some complaints officer functions related to that. So if you will have any questions, you can send it to me or through the chat box. Otherwise, I'll just move to the today's topics. Okay. Today we are, as I mentioned already, today we are going to discuss about anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism, which is sort of emerging topic these days. These days, in the sense, the recent past, in the sense 2000, after 2005 or 2010 period, it's emerged as an important topic in the global as well as in the country. And we are going to discuss about those things. What is the connection between the financial institution and anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism? First of all, before looking to the anti-money laundering, first we have to see what is money laundering. The money laundering is the process of making large amount of money generated by a criminal activity such as drug trafficking or terrorist funding appears to have come from a legitimate source. The money from the criminal activities is considered dirty, and the process launders it to make it look clean. So this is the definition of, this is sort of theoretical definition of money laundering. But we can simply understand, because I'm always emphasizing you all that any concept, it is better to have a simple understanding that will help you all to keep that concept in your mind. Then at the exam, if they ask any sort of questions, having that simple understanding of that concept, you can give the answer properly. So the simple understanding the money laundering is sort of the converting the dirty money into the clean money. That's why we are saying that money laundering. Why we saying so? This is a converting the dirty money. Is it black money? No, of course it's not a black money. The money raised or generated based on some criminal activities or illegal activities, those money can be called as a dirty money. For example, this truck trafficking activities. It means heroin, ganja, and all sort of drug related through the drug related activities, or the terrorism funding activities. Through that, some group of people may create or generate more money, which is considered as a, which may be considered as a illegal money or dirty money, because those money has not been generated based on the legal activities. So they can't put that money into the banking system directly, because this money was generated based on some illegal activity. So the dirty money. So somehow these launderers, what they are doing is somehow they are using some techniques, which we will see the later on. They will use some technique and convert this dirty money into the clean money or legitimate money. So that is the simple concept. The converting the dirty money into the legitimate money or clean money is called money laundering system. So these days, this money laundering system is sometimes is more famous, because this drug trafficking people and terrorist financing, as well as the undial system. We may heard about this undial Hawala system, undial system, which is also sort of part of this money laundering process. So this is the understanding about money laundering. It's a process of making large amount of money generated by the criminal activities appears to have come from legitimate sources. So that is called money laundering. So we can simply understanding that money laundering in this process. This is the typical money laundering scheme. Generally, they if you see the top side of this slide, the people generate or collect the dirty money at one point, and they can't just go and put into the banking system, because if it is a bank, when they are trying to deposit in the banking system, banks may ask what is the source for this money. Okay, so but they will use some sort of different techniques to put this money. For example, if we just go and try to deposit 100 million rupees at once, then bank cashier will get alert or bank will get alert, and they may ask what is the source of money and sort of questions from you. If you all work in the banking system or banking or financial institution, you may heard about this. So, but they will use the technique is they will just open the 10 accounts or 15 accounts, and they will deposit 1 million per accounts. So small amounts, they will transfer 500,000 rupees or 1 million rupees, a small amount to the deposit, and they will deposit in a 20, 50, 100 accounts and different banks. Some are in a bank X, some are in the bank Y, some are in the bank A, O, B, and all. Some different bank, small amount of money they will just put into that account. Then that is the first step. But the second step, first step is collecting the dirty money, then place in the bank using different system. The one system is depositing in a small amounts in a several accounts in the different banks, several banks. Then what they will do is, through the wire transfer or online transfer, they will withdraw that money from the different accounts and put it to the one account. Or no, initially they may not go to the one account, they may deposit in the if they deposit initially in the 100 account, they may convert it to the 10 account through the wire transfers. So now the 100 million will be lie on 10 million in the 10 account. Then they will again transfer this fund into the different countries or different banks and all. Then finally they will make it as a one account. They will this put all the money into that one account. And finally, from that account, they may purchase that. It may be real estate, it may be vehicles, it may be some precious gold or some precious metals. So anything, the valuable things they will invest. So once they invested it, and what they will do is, then they will sell it that product and make it as a legitimate money. So this is the process. They are just typically money laundering scheme is take place. So collect the dirty money and make that dirty and put the dirty money into using different techniques into the bank, several banks in the several accounts, and then through that through the wire transfer mechanism, they just put into the keep into the one or two accounts in the different countries, and then they make it to the one account. Using that money, they put into the by purchasing some valuable goods. It may be real estate or precious metal, also vehicle, and then take it that as a clean money. So in this way, they just make it the dirty money into the clean money. So this process is called as a money laundering process. Any doubt you all are having on this? Okay, in this money laundering, now we have seen the money laundering, and then we seen the terrorism financing, which we of course we all know that I can just give this money laundering example. One example. Recently, I think you all may also read the news items in the papers or internet. In Mount Lavinia or somewhere in the suburb Colombo area, one beggar's bank account had the 100 million rupees or some huge money. So when we are seeing that news, we may sometimes laugh, or we may just comment about it, joking it. See, the beggar has this much of money. But this is one of the way the people, the money launderers, open the account in a beggar's name, the beggar's name. So by using that, or sometimes sometimes they may use in the bogus names and identity card and all. They are just opening several accounts in the banks. So that is also sort of that may be those type of transactions may also be sort of money laundering activity. So that is about the money laundering activity. And terrorism financing. Of course, everybody has some overall understanding about the terrorism financing. The terrorism financing incorporates the activities of fundraising, storing and concealing funds, using funds to sustain terrorist organization and infrastructure, as well as transferring funds to support or carry out the specific terrorist attack. So these type of fundraising activities and storing and all related to the terrorism financing. So now we are just we may have an understanding that okay, there are two concepts. One concept is money laundering, other concept is terrorism financing. What is the main difference between these two is the money laundering starting with the dirty money. Okay, if there is any question in the exam papers, actually there were no questions on this, but if there is any question in the exam paper, you may answer the what is the difference between the money laundering and terrorism financing. The money laundering start with the dirty money or illegal money, but terrorism financing at the end, they are using that money into the illegal activities. Okay, this is the main difference between the terrorism financing as well as money laundering. So you all may have a clear understanding. I haven't mentioned in the tune. If you all want, just you all can note it out somewhere. The money laundering start with the illegal money, but terrorism financing at end, they are going to use that illegal activities. The money going to be used in the illegal activity. So that is the main difference between the money laundering and terrorism financing. Okay, now there may be an obvious question among us. Okay, there are money laundering system, there are the terrorism financing system. So that initially we have discussed about the anti-money laundering and countering terrorism, countering financing of terrorism. So now now we are coming to the main point, what is anti-money laundering. The anti-money laundering refers to the set of laws, regulations and procedures intended to prevent criminals from distinguishing illegally obtained funds as legitimate income. Though AML laws covers a relatively limited range of transactions and criminal behaviors, their implications are far-reaching. The thing is this: first we have to understand the concept. What is anti-money laundering? Anti-money laundering, of course, prevent the criminals from getting getting illegal or the illegally obtained fund making as a legitimate income. Because why we want to prevent is, if they allow, the criminal activities may increase in the country as well as the worldwide. So to prevent that, we are just putting some laws, regulations and procedures to prevent the money laundering activities. They say that even though the anti-money laundering laws covers relatively limited range of transaction and criminal behavior, their implications are far-reaching. These trucks and all activities, trucks related activities and all, which will harm the future generation of the country. If anybody wanted to destroy a country, what they can do is they can easily introduce trucks among the youth and young people. Then that country itself will destroy itself. That itself will destroy. So to prevent such a criminal activities, this anti-money laundering refers a set of laws and regulations and procedures. And countering financing of terrorism, of course, which involve investigating, analyzing, deterring, and preventing source of funding for activities intended to achieve political, religious, and ideological goals through violence and threat the violence against civilians. So the terrorism activities, countering financing of terrorism involve to prevent any fundraising activities for this illegal activity, the violence, and which may threat against the civilians' peace. So these two are the definition. If in the exam, if they ask any definition, actually there can be four type of questions. First one is, what is money laundering? And there may be other questions, what is anti-money laundering? If somebody asks what is money laundering, you have to give the answer. This money laundering is the process of making large amount of money generated by criminal activities appears to have come from the legitimate sources. That is money laundering. But if they in the exam, if they ask what is anti-money laundering, then you have to give, it refers to a set of laws and regulations and procedure intended to prevent criminals from illegally obtained fund as legitimate income. So likewise, similarly, there may be two questions about what is financing of terrorism, what is countering financing of terrorism. So you may have to argue proper answer for those things. So before going to the know your customers, do you all have any questions on this money laundering or terrorism finance? If you all have any questions, I can answer. Otherwise, I can just move to the other topics. Any questions on money laundering? And I think if you all work in the financial institutions, you all may heard about this. There may be several procedures has to be followed by the banks and financial institutions with related to the anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism. Any questions? Okay, if you don't have the questions, I'll just move to the know your customer. I think latter part of the last class, I have just opened this concept, know your customer, and then I just stopped the classes due to this time factors. So then now we are just again properly seeing the know your customer. The know your customer enables the banks to know, understand their customers and their financial dealing to able to save them better and prudently manage the risk of money laundering and financing of terrorism. The simple concept is the banks and financial institutions. The know your customer means banks and enable the banks and financial institution to know their customers and their activities, which will facilitate the financial institution to better and prudently manage the risk of money laundering and financing of terrorism. So, for example, if you are going to the banks or financial, or if you wanted to open a saving account or fixed deposit account, then the banks may ask billing proof. Bank may ask your photo. So, banks, the cashier may take a photo because to identify your activities. Because this way, I explained to you all, when they are doing the money laundering, sometimes they may give bogus identity, the addresses, bogus name to the bank and open the accounts. To avoid that situation, the banks asking the billing proof and identity card or passport to open account, as well as they are taking the photos, which is sort of compulsory requirement in Sri Lanka. I think during this lockdown period, this number of digital accounts have been opened by the banks to make online transfers. So at that time, since the first lockdown period, and at that time, of course, the people, there were restriction on moving the peoples and open the branches. So central bank relaxed the banks, financial institution, they can, and allowing the financial institution to open the accounts without this billing proof. But I heard that there were some transaction, a suspicious transaction through those accounts. Then finally, subsequently, the regulators and banks rectified. But thing is, what I say is, when there are some loopholes, these financial, money laundering people, they will get activated, get alert, and they just trying to use that path. So that's why the banks and financial institution asking the proof, and they are just trying to know about the customers and their activities. An objective of the KYC is to prevent the terrorist financing, money laundering, and financial fraud as well. The KYC allowed to understand the customer better and manage the risk prudently. When I am saying the manage the risk prudently, in the sense, why we are saying the manage the risk prudently? Because even though this money laundering and financing of terrorism having the impact to the country as a whole, even individual financial institution also may get affected when the country is getting involved in the transaction. Because these money laundering people, what they are doing is sometimes they, for example, if that sort of financial frauds, but through the using this money laundering system, they use that activity also. So the risk, such risk created from these money laundering people are are making losses to the banks and financial institutions. That is why the objective is preventing the terrorism financing and money laundering and financial fraud as well. And so that is about the know your customer. And know your customer due diligence is an ongoing process for prudent banking practice. Therefore, banks are encouraged to do the followings. So, with related to the know your customer things, the banks has to do certain things. First one is put in place a system to monitor the accounts and transaction on regular basis. This is the main weakness we can find in the financial institution, including banks. For example, they may collect the billing through at the time of opening the accounts, but subsequently, these banks and financial institution does not check or verify whether that billing flow is still valid. So that's what they are saying, that they have to have the system to monitor the accounts and transaction on regular basis. And they have to update the information, update the customer information at reasonable intervals. And maintain the proper records of customer identifications. Even though, you know, when we are going to the supervision in the banks and financial institutions, we may see that there will be a KYC forms in the with the banking opening mandates, as the account opening mandates. But that customer KYC forms, the most of the instances KYC forms are not filled properly. They are just writing some names and just give some identity card number, this and that, and they just incomplete. For most of the instances, we found incomplete forms from the banks. So maintain the proper record of customer identification is important. And monitor and check unusually large transactions, which is I have already explained to you in the last class. The bank has to do any unusual large transaction. For example, if a teacher or government officer comes and open an account, and at the time of opening the account, he declares that his monthly salary, his or her monthly salary is 50,000 or 75,000. Then at that person, they always transacting with the banks within the 50,000 limits. Always 50,000 is coming to the account and he is withdrawing and all. So that is the pattern of the transactions. But suddenly that customer come and deposit 10 million rupees in the account. Then the bank should be getting alert or should get alert on that transactions. And if there is any suspicion, the first thing is they can verify with the customer what is the reason for this the large amount sum of the deposits. If they cannot get the proper answer from the customer, they have to report this in as a suspicious transaction to the central bank. So they have to monitor and check the unusual large transactions in their day-to-day business, and providing training to staff on KYC, which is also important. Actually, not only staff, even the board of directors, even the senior management level, the CEOs and DGM, AGM level, they have to provide training. They have to create an awareness among those people. What is KYC and what is anti-money laundering? What is the countering financing of terrorism, and what are the impacts, and all sort of things has to be mentioned. So these are the things the bank has to do with related to the know your customer policy. Any doubt you will want to ask? Okay, then now there's a new concept. The new concept means which is sort of future of the KYC, know your customer policy. If you see that in the know your customer, there are some weaknesses. What are the weaknesses in the sense that know your customers is generally monitor the customer as a whole and which does not capture the each and every transaction one by one. And customer may have several different transactions. So the know your customer may not capture each and every different type of transaction. So by considering that weaknesses, now there's other concept emerging which is called know your transaction, KYT. The KYC is sort of the old concept. Now the new concept become the KYT, know your transaction. The KYT is performed to verify and monitor the transaction done by the customers. So which is a more granular level, which examine more granular level in the customers each and every transactions and verify and monitor. Some major financial transactions associated with customer accounts include cash and card transactions, cross-border transactions, inward and outward remittances, and cross-border and trade finance transactions. Everything will be captured in the know your transaction concept. So one customer's entire transaction will be captured and which will be verified and monitored by the banks and financial institutions. So that is called know your transaction. And the objective aim of the know your transaction is to identify potentially risky transaction and their underlying unusual behavior for detecting money laundering, fraud, or corruption. So this is the concept of know your transaction. Actually, there were no questions about the know your transaction. This is sort of new concept. Keep it in mind. Sometimes they may ask questions. Sometimes, I don't know. So before going to the other sections, you will have any questions? Okay. Since you all don't have the questions, this is very straightforward. Actually, there won't be much doubt in these sections. But this is sort of things we have to cover. That's what I just clearly explaining all the things. So if you all have any questions, you all can ask. Otherwise, we can just move to the other section. Okay, we have studied about the money laundering. What is money laundering? And then we have studied about what is financing of terrorism. Then we have studied about the anti-money laundering concept and countering of financing of terrorism concept. Then we have studied about the know your customers and know your transactions. Okay, so these are related concept in the anti-money laundering and countering of terrorism financing of terrorism. That's fine. But in Sri Lanka, there is a regulator which look into these matters, this anti-money laundering and the AML and CFT matters, which will be looked by the particular regulators, which is called the Financial Intelligence Unit of Sri Lanka. FIU, in the short form we call as a FIU. All these the anti-money laundering, AML and CFT related things will be reported to this Financial Intelligence Unit of Sri Lanka, which was established in the March 2006 as an autonomous body under the Ministry of Finance and Planning. Then subsequently, FIU reorganized in February 2007 as an independent institution within the central bank's framework and administrative structure. Currently, FIU is functioning within the central bank as one of the department, but they are having more autonomous. Not like other department, these people are having sort of autonomous and independency. Their whole purpose is monitoring these anti-money laundering and terrorism financing activities. And if there is any suspicious transaction, they have to take care of it. You all may heard about recently the central bank released a press release about that they have imposed some penalties to the 3 finance companies which violated this anti-money laundering and finance, countering financing of terrorism, the regulations. So this is one of the example how this FIU Act of FIU has the authority to impose the penalties to the financial institution where when the financial institution violating the regulations, AML and CFT regulations. When they are violating the AML CFT regulations, the FIU can impose the penalties. Recently, they have imposed some penalties to the 3 finance companies. Just read that press release, which may give some additional information to you all. Because when you see the paper has altogether 8 questions, and the part 1 questions, the first question has the 10 subsections, and the other 7 structural questions. So each question has the 20 marks. So in the part 1 questions, sometimes there are questions related to the general knowledge as well. General knowledge in the sense, some are related to the financial institution as well. 1 or 2 questions. So sometimes they may ask this type of questions as well. So you are better to keep in mind. Just read the press release and you can get some idea, additional idea. And other thing is, I am always mentioning you all that it's studying is getting knowledge as well as passing exam. So to at least to get the knowledge, just read the press release. So what I am saying is, this Financial Intelligence Unit has the power to impose the penalties to the financial institutions. Okay, the objective of the FIU in FIU Sri Lanka, the main objective of the FIU Sri Lanka is to combat the money laundering, terrorism financing, and other related crimes in Sri Lanka in line with international recommendation and standard. Actually, there's a body which is an international body, and that has the international recommendation and standards. So even though Sri Lanka, the customize their requirement and make the regulations and pass the laws and some relevant laws and regulations, these are in line with the international recommendations and standards. So main objective of the FIU is to combat the money laundering and terrorism financing and other related criminal activities in line with the international recommendation and standards. Why we are saying in line with the international recommendation standard? Because sometimes some standards and recommendation may be okay for us, but when we are comparing the international recommendation, which may not meet their standards, so we have to upgrade to that standard. For example, the last I think in 2005 or somewhere, 2015 or somewhere, 2012, 15, I'm not aware the exact year, but Sri Lanka was downgraded to or put into the grey list by the international body with related to the AML CFT activities, the anti-money laundering and terrorism financing activities. So the international body says that Sri Lanka has not followed the international recommendation and standards and put the Sri Lanka into the grey list, sort of blacklist one. So it is not really blacklist, but the grey list. Grey list in the sense sort of should have some monitoring, close monitoring or something, and they gave some recommendation. Okay, if you wanted to take out from this grey list, you have to follow this recommendation and standards, international recommendation and standards. So central bank work with the stakeholders, and they introduce new regulations and everything. Then I think 2019 September, it was Sri Lanka was delisted from the grey list. Now Sri Lanka is no more in the grey list. Actually, when the Sri Lanka, you all may ask that what is the consequences of listing in the grey list? Because if we put into the grey list, it may create financial cost as well as reputational cost to the country. When we are in the grey list, we can't make some transaction with some countries, and for some transaction LCs and all, sometimes there may be more charges from the counterparty because since we are in the grey list. So that's why we have to. That's why they say that the prime objective is this combating money laundering and terrorism financing in line with the international recommendation standard. In achieving the above objective, the Financial Intelligence Unit FIU has set up the following objective: strengthen the AML CFT activities in Sri Lanka, upgrading the existing AML CFT regime in Sri Lanka, upgrading the compliance status of Sri Lanka to internationally accepted level, and strengthen the cooperation with international organizations implementing the international best practices on AML CFT. If you see the central bank press releases, you may observe that time to time FIU Sri Lanka signed with some other countries FIUs, Financial Intelligence Unit, and they just sign it sort of a mutual understanding agreement, and based on that agreement they worked in future, they may work in jointly work to combat this finance anti-money laundering, combat the money laundering and financing of terrorism. So these are the sub-objective of this FIU. The functions of the FIUs. The Financial Intelligence Unit of Sri Lanka, FIU Sri Lanka, as a central depository of reported information, perform the following core functions: receiving cash transaction report, electronic fund transfers, suspicious transaction report from all reporting institutions, which we will see that what are the reporting institutions. Actually, time to time, this reporting institution, they have to report this cash transaction report and electronic fund transfers and suspicious transactions report to the FIU Sri Lanka. I think every month they have to submit, and there's a limit, of course. They need not to submit each and every transaction. There's a limit. If it is more than 1 million or something, they have to report. But of course, suspicious transaction, there is no such a limit. Even the small amount, if there is a suspicious, then they have to report. They have to report that suspicious transaction under the to the central bank and the FIU Sri Lanka. That is one function. And second function is analyzing the data collected to identify the financial rails to support prosecutions, and the analysis of the data is mainly in the three forms: tactical, operational, and strategic. So this is other function of the FIU. And the dissemination of information locally and internationally, since money laundering and terrorism financing are often cross-border activities. Because that's what I have explained to you all, that this FIU Sri Lanka may in the past they signed with several agreements of the understanding memorandum of understanding agreement with other countries FIUs, and then they are sharing the information in the locally and international, because most of the money laundering, we just see the typical money laundering mechanism. Most of the money laundering just having the cross-border activities. So when there is a cross-border activities, suspicious cross-border activities, they just inform to the counterparty countries, other countries. So that is also one of the function of FIU Sri Lanka. And I have mentioned this reporting institution, FIU Sri Lanka collect the information from the following institutions. The monthly and time to time they have to report their this as I mentioned here, cash transaction, electronic fund transfer, and suspicious transaction to the FIU. These are the institutions. Licensed commercial bank, licensed specialized bank, licensed finance companies and specialized leasing companies, insurance companies, stock brokering firms, Columbus Stock Exchange, unit trust companies, restricted dealers, authorized primary dealers, money brokers, etc. There are a number of companies which are related to the finance institution. They have to report to the FIU. Here you can see that even casinos, real estate agents, even they have to report to the suspicious transaction and some card transaction and all to the FIU. Even the lawyers, accountants, if there is any large transactions take place, even the related to the any land registry or some lawyers notorious lawyers they have to report. Notaries, lawyers and notaries they have to report. So this is about the financial run. Before moving to the legal things, do you have any questions? If you have any questions, I can answer first. Otherwise, I can move. I think sometimes you all may feel the boring because this is more theoretical matters and more there is nothing much to explain. So you all may feel boring. I don't know. If you all have any question, you all can answer. I don't know whether you all are getting the point. So you all have any questions? Okay. This is always I am telling to all the classes. Maybe I would have told to you all as well. If there is no any questions from the class, there can be two assumptions. The first assumption, the students are 100% clear. If they are 100% clear, there won't be any questions. The second assumption, the students are not clear at all, 0% clear. Even if they don't clear at all, there won't be any questions. When there will be a question is if the students are getting cleared by 50%, 60%, 70 or 80, 90%, then there may be 10% doubt or 12%, 20% doubt. Then students may raise the questions. So under these two assumptions, I don't know which assumption I can take, but I am taking the safer side. I am taking the first assumption. I feel you all understand fully. That's why there is no questions. Okay, having that note, I'm just moving to the other area. This is the legislations related to the anti-money laundering and combating or countering financing of terrorism. We have when we are studying the anti-money laundering and countering of financing of terrorism, we say that which is anti-money laundering is a process of implementing some laws and regulations and all to prevent the criminal activities. Okay. So what are the laws? There are mainly 3 laws are involved with this anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism, which is Convention on Suppression of Terrorism, Terrorist Financing Act number 25 of 2005. And the second one is Prevention of Money Laundering Act number 5 of 2006. And third one is Financial Transaction Reporting Act number 6 of 2006. Some of these acts have been amended later on, but initially in 2005 and 6 these acts were enacted or we introduced or approved by the parliament. So if there is any question you will have to answer, there are 3 acts related to the AML and CFT. First is Convention on Suppression of Terrorist Financing Act. Second one is Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Third one is Financial Transaction Reporting Act. These are the 3 acts. We will see this act. What is this act? The number 25 of 2005 Convention on the Suppression of Terrorist Financing Act was enacted 8 August 2005 in order to give effect to Sri Lanka's obligation as a signatory to the International Convention on the Suppression of Terrorist Financing adopted by United Nations on January 10th of 2000. The Act prohibits the financing of terrorist and terrorist organizations. Further, this Act has provision of freezing the terrorist financing related assets and forfeited the such assets. This Asset Act has been further strengthened through the amendment brought to the Act in 2011 and 2013. There are some amendments in 2011 and 13. I think nothing to explain much. This is sort of act you can keep in mind. This is the initial act which give the powers to the Sri Lanka to sign the convention with this United Nations convention, and this act has been enacted in 2011, amended in 2011 and 13. And number 5 of 2006 Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which prohibits the money laundering, was enacted in 6th March 2006. It also set out the necessary measures to combat the money laundering, such as freezing, property tracking, and forfeited the assets related to money laundering. This act was further amended in 2011. So I think this is 2006, number 5 of 2006 Act. So this act is relatively a more important act. This act gives the power to FIU to collect the information, which is to the number 6 of 2006 Financial Transactions Reporting Act. Financial Transaction Reporting Act was certified on 6th March 2006 and provide the setting up of FIU as a national agency to collect the data information related to suspicious financial transaction to facilitate the prevention, detection, investigation and prosecution of the offense of money laundering and the financing of terrorism, the long sentence. So simply understand this, according to this act only, the FIU Sri Lanka was setting up to collect the data and information related to money laundering and financing of terrorism. So this is the act give the power to the FIU to collect the data and act. It also requires mandate institution to undertake due diligence measures to combat money laundering and the financing of terrorism. This act has some requirement. Every institution should appoint a compliance officer who shall be responsible for ensuring the institution's compliance with the requirement of this act. Actually, here only we are so far. You may thought about it. Why we are studying this? We under the compliance functions. Actually, this is the point we are connecting this so far what we have studied and the compliance functions. Each and every officer, every finance institution should appoint a compliance officer who shall be responsible for ensuring the institution's compliance with the requirement of this Financial Transaction Reporting Act. So under this act, the compliance officer should be appointed to comply with this financial reporting purpose. There's a general compliance officer. He has been given the additional duties or responsibilities under this act as well. So establish the maintaining procedure of the system. So under this act, they should establish and maintaining the procedure and system to implement the customer identification requirement. That's what we are. Every bank should collecting the KYC. Know your customer detail. Implement procedures for record keeping and retention requirement. And third one is implement the process of monitoring. Implement the reporting requirement, making its officers and employees aware of law relating to money laundering and financing of terrorism. So this act only required the banks and finance institutions to establish the procedures for these things. Understand? Train its staffs and employees and agents to recognize suspicious transactions should be under this act requirement. This financial report transaction reporting act requirement, as per the section 6 of this act, banks and finance institution is required to report cash transaction and electronic fund transfers, inward or outward, exceeding the threshold of 1 million or its equivalent to foreign currencies. If there is any transactions related to the more than 1 million or equivalent to foreign currency, that transaction should be electronic cash transfer or electronic fund transfer, that should be reported to the FIU under this section 6 of this act. And in terms of this act, persons, natural, illegal person, including any body of person engaged in or carrying out the finance business and designated non-finance business are required to comply with the provision of this act. Here you all may ask that finance business, of course we know that. What is designated non-finance business? Some particular business, even though it is a finance, it is not a finance business, but under the non-finance business, they have to comply with this act requirement. Those are the things I have pointed out to you all, that the real estate businesses and precious metal sales and other transactions, the business institutions, as well as accountants, lawyers and all are coming under this designated non-finance businesses. So under this, the finance business as well as designated non-finance business are required to comply with this act. Understand? Okay, before moving to that, I think we are coming to the sort of end to this into this act or this topic. Do you have any questions? Otherwise, I'll just move into the latter part of this section, which is about the duties and of the compliance officer on AML and CFT. So as I mentioned already, the compliance officer has some duties: anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. Related to that activity, our general compliance officer has some activities, which is assess and periodically update the overall money laundering and terrorist financing risk of the institution, prepare the anti-money laundering, conducting financing of terrorism compliance policies and procedures, and obtain the approval of the top management, implement custom identification requirement, implement process for record keeping requirement, make officers aware of laws relating to money laundering, terrorist financing and training officers, employees, and agents to recognize the institution, screen all persons before hiring them as employees, establish an audit function to test its procedures and systems. So these are, I think, nothing much to explain to you all. These are some of the duties they have to, the complaints officer has to follow in addition to the AML and CFT. I think that's all about the this today's topic. So we have seen about the last class we have discussed about the money laundering, the compliance functions. Today we are discuss about the anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism. Under that, we just seen about what is money laundering and the typical money laundering schemes and the terrorism financing as well as AML CFT. It means anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism. Then know your customer and know your transaction concepts. And then we have seen about the FIU Sri Lanka and its objective function and reporting agencies and some related act related to this finance AML and CFT. And then we just finally we have seen the duties of the compliance officer on AML and CFT. I think that's all about these compliance functions. Since we are having some time, we can just see about some papers, which you all can just. These are some past paper questions related to the compliance function of which we have studied so far. So this is the question came in September 2018 as a question number 6. In this question, in this question, as I mentioned already in the exam papers, there are two type of questions. There are 8 questions altogether. Number 1 question, the first question have this 10 sub parts, which each has 2 marks, and other 7 questions. Out of the 7 questions, you have to collect. You have to select the 4 questions, and each question have the 20 marks. So this is one of those type of questions. The question number 6. So they have starting that compliance risk management in a deposit-taking financial institution will not be effective unless the board promotes the value of honesty, integrity throughout the organization. What is compliance risk? Why it is important to control and manage compliance risk in an effective manner, which we have studied, I think, in the last class. What is compliance risk? The compliance risk is the risk or is there any financial losses or reputational losses, loss of continuity of business arise due to the non-compliance of rules, regulations, and internal best practices or industry practices is called the compliance risk. Understand? Why it is important to control and manage the compliance function in the risk? Because failing compliance functions may create losses to the financial institutions. That particular institutions, the particular losses may be financial losses, or it may be reputational losses, or any type of losses. But to avoid this type of the losses, the bank has to bank and financial institution has to follow the this complaints. And other point you all can mention it. Now the regulators may require the board of directors to comply with the regulations. So they have to comply with them. So that is an important to control and manage the compliance risk effectively. Actually, the first one is most important. It may create a risk. Compliance risk may create financial losses or reputational losses to the institution. So that's why they have to create they have to control and manage the compliance risk. The second one is the compliance function should have formal status within the deposit taking financial institution to give it an appropriate standing, authority, and independence. Do you agree? Uh, do you agree? Briefly explain your answer. Are you agree or not? Are you agree or not? It's agree. Because compliance function, the formal status of the compliance function should be created within the institutions. And I think the last class we have discussed about things. There is a sort of function. The board of directors should appoint a proper compliance officer within the financial institution, and there should be an adequate staff has to be given to the compliance functions, and they have to give independence. That compliance function should be independent, and that compliance independency should be maintained. And so it means the compliance officer or other staff of the compliance department should not be allocated to other functions. And the third one, you all can say that compliance policy should be properly approved by the banks and financial institutions, the board of directors of the banks and finance institution. So that then it will be the sort of in the form, the compliance function will be getting the formal status. And third one is discuss the role of compliance officer. I think this is, I need not to explain much, because in the last class we have studied about this the compliance officer responsibility. Compliance officer, as a compliance officer, he has the responsibility of advising to the board of directors and senior management on the compliance function. He has a responsibility of identifying the reporting and maintaining record on the compliance risk of the banks and finance institution, and he has the responsibility of monitoring the compliance risk over the institution in the within the institutions. And compliance function and internal audit function should be separated and discuss the importance, which also we have discussed these things. Actually, the compliance function is about the second line of it's about the it is responsible to overseeing the compliance risk of within the institution, but the internal audit give an assurance all the rules and regulations are followed by the banks and financial institutions. That is first thing we can mention. The second thing we can mention, the compliance functions, it's a second line of defense. The internal audit function is a third line of defense. Third one is compliance function has less independence compared to internal audit function. Internal audit function has more independence. So these type of answers you can give for with the compliance functions. This is about 2018 March questions. An effective, this is also sixth question of this 2018 March. An effective compliance function within a deposit-taking finance institution ensures the provision of independent and timely advice to management on compliance and regulatory issues. It also encourages best practices and work to protect the interest of all stakeholders. So first question they are asking that what does it mean by the compliance? The compliance means the follow and why there is an increasing importance for compliance. So there are two questions. The first one is the compliance means the financial institution following the laws, regulations, and other internal process and industry best practices are called as a compliance. It means it's a compliance means following the laws, regulations, internal process as well as industry best practices are called compliance. Why there is an increasing importance of compliance in the industry? Because there is a regulators force the board of directors to implement the proper compliance functions. So board of directors that they are since they are responsible, they are implementing the compliance function within the financial institution. That's why there is an importance giving to the compliance in the present. And it creates a reputation. If they don't comply with the laws and regulations, it may create a compliance risk. So that's why it's getting a more important risk. And the second question is, compliance officer should solely bear the responsibility of compliance. Do you agree? Briefly explain. Are you agree with this or not? The compliance officer should surely bear the responsibility for compliance. Do you agree or not? No. Actually, the answer will be no. Why? Because the role of compliance officer is just monitoring the responsibility of monitoring the compliance functions and its staff. But the entire compliance function should be, it's a collective responsibility of managing the compliance risk and compliance, and especially the ultimate responsibility of the compliance function is lying with the board of directors. So board of directors only appoint the compliance officer, and the compliance officer overseeing the compliance. So he is a part of the compliance function, but it is the the compliance function is entirely the collective responsibility of the all the stakeholders of the or the officers of the finance institution. Why tone at the top is essential for effective compliance, which is I think the last question also we have seen that the compliance function should be a formal status. This tone of the top also it's sort of similar answer you can give. The first one is complaint functions that it should be implemented from the top management board of directors, and board of directors should give a formal status to the compliance function. They have to approve the policies. Another thing we can mention, it is the responsibility of the board of directors to create a culture within the institution to follow the compliance functions. So those are the things you can mention on this question. And compliance officer should be assigned with sufficient seniority and authority to make independent. Briefly explain. This is other thing we have studied in the last class. The compliance officer should be a senior officer, and proper independency and authority has to be given to the compliance officer. Otherwise, he can't oversee the compliance function within the finance institution. See, you can see that if it is a junior officer, he may not have the say in other officers to check others the compliance risk or anything. So you have to answer in such a way. I think that's all about these papers. I just mentioned these two papers just to give an idea. Okay, these are the things you will have to look into. Oh, these are the question papers. Then you can focus on the study. That's all about. I think we have finished it early. If you will have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we can complete this session, and we can join with a new class, the next class with a new topic. You will have any questions? Okay, I'll wind up the class. Thank you.